Good day. My name is Evan Berman. I'm a professor of public management at Fundação Getúlio Vargas in São Paulo, Brazil. It's a pleasure for me to present to you today during the Second Congress on International Studies on China at the Confucius Institute at the University of Costa Rica. As you can see, I will be presenting to you on what can South America learn from China, lessons in governance. I've been asked by Ms. Mai to present about 30 to 40 minutes, and I probably have a few too many slides, but I'll go quickly through them and you will get the idea. I will talk today, first briefly introduce myself, and I'll talk a little bit about public administration and what that is, which is my area of research. I will then talk about China's economic miracle, which many people know, but what I will focus on is the theory of target management. And then I will show how what has been developed in China or perfected in China is now being used outside China as well and has relevance for South America. So I'm a professor of public management at FGV, as you can see, and the areas that I research are public performance, leadership, and comparative public administration and human resource management. I spent about 15 years in Asia Pacific, first in Chinese Taipei and then in New Zealand, where I worked with people in China and other countries in Asia as well. On the right, you can see various books that I wrote, and you can see below that it's been reasonably well received and awarded by the American Society for Public Administration. I'm currently in Brazil. Just a few words about FGV, which you may or may not know. FGV is Brazil's top private university, and it is one of the top 3 leading business schools in South America. We are located in São Paulo, which is arguably the economic engine of Brazil. And there we have both a very large business administration program as well as various public administration programs. So what is public administration or governance? Well, I'll give you here a definition. Usually when people hear business administration, people have a fairly clear idea what that would be. What that would be about how to lead and manage companies. Well, public administration is quite similar. It refers to both a professional practice and an academic discipline that does research, which seeks to understand, develop, and improve the leadership and management of public purpose organizations. Now, obviously, those are often government organizations, but many people in our area also study nonprofit organizations as well. To give you just a very quick bird's eye snapshot of the field, we typically recognize 3 different periods, and you may recognize various aspects of this in your own experiences. The first period is about 100 years old. It's a classic focus and deals with the question, what should managers in these organizations be doing? And the answer is they should be planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting. These are words that were used in the 1930s. Today, they remain very relevant as well. For example, planning becomes strategic planning or community-based strategic planning. Directing is not called directing, it's called leadership, but we call leaders directors, and so on and so forth. Budgeting is often budgeting and finance. And of course, what is missing from the 1930s is IT and e-government is increasingly very important. Now, those activities, even very quickly beyond the 1930s, became associated with bureaucracy in a rather negative way. And that did continue for quite some time until the 1980s. In the 1980s, a movement towards new public management came into being that emphasized a number of different targets, such as client or customer or citizen orientation, and the use of digital government applications, notably one-stop shopping, e-government, and so on and so forth. Like today, it would be very common to file your taxes online and do a number of things with government online in a much quicker way as well. It's also associated with a period of outsourcing, recognizing that private sector capabilities have increased dramatically since the 1930s or 40s. And in many cases, we can use the private sector to perform the task of government. Since the early 1990s, especially 2000s, a new frontier in public administration is dealing with complex issues. Arguably, it can be argued that many of the leading issues of our time are all complex in the sense of crime, education, health, transportation, economic development, require cooperation, coordination among multiple levels of government, and often multiple levels of actors in society as well. So I show here a a cluster of different organizations that need to work together to solve these complex issues. This is a frontier of our time, and different countries are making different progress in different areas. So that gives you a brief overview of what public administration is. And now we'll be talking about China. So the topic that I want to talk about is China's economic miracle, which I don't need to explain for this audience at all. Rather, I will be focusing on a particular administrative mechanism of target setting and target management. But just the very big picture is to remind people, I guess, that in 1978, China had 22% of the world's population, but only 2% of the world's GDP. Very fast forward, 45 years later, China is well known for its many exports, and many products that people buy around the world are manufactured in China. China is now a leading source of, for example, new cars. It has a burgeoning high-speed rail system, one of the largest. It has built many universities. And importantly, it has also lifted millions, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, which is very relevant to South America. And I'll get to this a little bit later about companies associated with China's artificial intelligence industry. But if you were to look at these would be names that you probably do not recognize. By the numbers also, here's the line of America GDP shown over here. Here you see China's GDP, and you see that in a reflection, a inflection point over here where it starts to really increase. Now, this is GDP, and if you look, of course, GDP by PPP, China has surpassed the American GDP. Perhaps that is not totally surprising, as China has a much larger population than America and has made major strides in the economic area. But I think what is interesting here, the gray line is Japan, and the yellow line here is Brazil. And I guess a similar line could be drawn for many South American countries. It is not that these countries are doing bad in any sense. It's just that other countries are doing better. And that is what we want to focus on. What is the source of these other countries doing better? Over here, this is difficult to read, I know, but it shows the growth of the Chinese GDP and various plans and activities associated with that I'll get into. Now, the particular aspect of China's economic growth that I want to focus on is the development of regional centers in which this economic growth occurs. I guess if one has not been to China, one might think that maybe Beijing must be very large, but that is in fact not necessarily the case. Much of the economic activity is associated with the development of new regional provincial clusters, as you can see here. It's no longer just associated with Beijing, Shanghai, or Hong Kong, for example. And in this way, I might add that China resembles patterns of economic development in other major developed countries as well, such as the US, where growth is not centered around Washington alone, but also in Massachusetts, New York, Texas, and California. You could say the same thing around in Germany, England, France, and so on. Major countries have developed themselves economically in around different clusters of activities. And so the question is, how did these clusters come to emerge? If a picture can speak 1,000 words, I'd like to show you this slide and the next one, which is about Shanghai, to give you a sense of what this economic growth over 45 years or more means. Here you see the picture of the east side of the Bund of Shanghai in the 1950s, and basically there's nothing there. Now in the 1980s, this is the Bund, and over here you see some economic activity and growth happening. But today it looks like this. And actually, this building had been completed, of course, as well. And along with this growth is also, for example, the development of infrastructure, such as a major subway system. By comparison, here you see the subway system of São Paulo. And I also give you some numbers here, perhaps, just to compare. Shanghai has a municipal area, a population of 24 million, São Paulo 12 million, a metropolitan population of 34 million, and São Paulo 21 million. So both are very, very major cities, but São Paulo doesn't look as modern as this. São Paulo had its heyday in the 1970s. Now, for this particular group, I said I had too many slides, but I think I can add just a few slides of theory, which I think this audience may appreciate. Many of you especially the political scientists and economists will be familiar with the term developmental state and the regulatory state. In many ways, China is an example of a developmental state where the state is a major player in the guidance, management, and promotion of economic activity. By contrast, in a regulatory state such as the US, the state is a referee, ensuring that all private players behave in accordance to certain rules of the game. That does not mean, of course, that the US does not also involve itself in developmental activities of some kind. You can think about drug development at the NIH, activities like NASA. So all states do some development and also some regulatory work. But the fast rise of China is often associated with it being a developmental state or emphasizing that particular aspect. Now, we do actually know how to promote economic growth, which has been well studied. And on this slide, I show you 5 factors. Some disciplines like economics might only focus on the first or second one. Other disciplines might focus on others as well. So there are 5 different activities that seem to be associated with promoting economic growth. The first one, it deals with ensuring certain macroeconomic factors, such as stable exchange rate. There has to be capital for investment by the private sector. The private sector needs skilled laborers, and hence university that produces science and engineering and other kind of graduates. Inflation needs to be kept under control, and so on. There are about 10 or 12 or maybe 15 factors of macroeconomic stability that need to be there. And when those do not happen, such as inflation rises, or there's a shortage of capital, or the currency devalues strongly, that can surely affect economic development. But beyond that, it has also been recognized that political and social factors also matter. In particular, I noticed 2 or 3 here. One is around stability. It's important that in the midterm and long term, there is political predictability, stability, and social stability as well. Social stability means a lack of ethnic strife. And in countries where there is social instability, that immediately affects economic growth. Political stability means predictability. And I think it is interesting that both China and, for example, the US show that. When there is, for example, an election in the US, one does expect to have a certain stability and continuity of major economic policies. Yes, some policies will change, just as in China, every 5 or 10 years, major policies will change. But there's also a sense of stability that business counts on. In the past, at least, population growth has also been associated with economic growth. More people demand more economic services, and it's a sure way for economic development. Although in recent years, of course, Japan is a model of not having population growth as well. So we are going to be moving into that area as well. And finally, some studies in the past have mentioned work ethic as an important factor. Certainly people in East Asia work hard, but in Europe and North America, it's been well documented that Protestant people, or Protestant work ethic, is also associated with a strong work ethic. So whether that's a differentiating factor or not, I'll leave it up to the different opinions of researchers. Now, beyond this, government does play a role to ensure these factors. So institutional factors matter, and we talk about governing effectiveness. Governments must be able to make policy, and they must be able to deliver that. In addition, there is a factor of having support from elites, business elites, or other kinds of elites, and the absence of grand corruption or rent seeking by those elites as well. So elite support for government effectiveness seems to be important. And what we will be focusing on here is a delivery aspect, specifically how states are organized for that, or how China is organized for that, and does that through target setting and management. Now, beyond that, I want to say for the developmental state in particular, sector strategies play an important role, because the purpose of developmental state is to develop, and many industries initially are maybe not leading in the world, and they seek to make them leading. So for different sectors, there will be a need for ensuring technology, ensuring that there's infrastructure, whatever that means. That could be science and engineering labor, or it could be simply roads and other infrastructure. I'm thinking about, for example, the fishery industry. For countries that want to export fishery, they need a cooling facility, good rail facilities to export, and so on, international market access, and like so. So ensuring that sectors develop according to certain targets of progress and ensuring that they have the capacity of addressing what may be missing, what private sector companies themselves cannot provide for, is part of the developmental state. And then you need public policies to ensure these particular strategies. So we do know, we do have sort of a recipe for how to promote economic growth. And I think you can think of your own country, your own circumstances, where any of these may be missing and what the consequences may be. Needless to say, many economists focus on one and maybe two, and and others might focus on the entire mix. I know that this is controversial in certain circles. In Chinese parlance, the economic miracle is sometimes said to involve both unleashing a creative market power, dealing with market competition, and ensuring macroeconomic conditions, as well as the visible steering hand of the state that we will be talking about. And what does that do? It involves, in general terms, some state-steered development, investment-driven economy, an export-led economy that eventually needs to involve more consumption power, seeking comparative advantages versus other countries, and having a reform path and strategy that gets to these targets. And again, our focus is going to be the state doing these things. So what specific activity does the state do? Well, in my analysis anyway, it looks like there's some government planning in the market economy, and these things seem to be generally present, including in China. One, there is some planning. The government set some targets, 1, 5, and 10-year plans that may provide, quote, guidance as to what not only the private sector, but also the public sector will be focusing on. And it involves some industry-specific targets, and as well as broad targets of economic success, addressing the necessary infrastructure for these industries and lacking conditions, as I said, and also focusing to ensure solid competition because that is a road to economic development, while also maintaining sort of regional or global integration, because companies do not operate in isolation. There are clusters of companies that often lead industries. There are lessons there from Massachusetts and California, Silicon Valley, for example, which have been leading examples and whose lessons are well absorbed now around the world. To realize these plans, because any government can make plans, but you have to realize, you have to manage for results. So one of the things that is involved is coordination across the agencies to ensure that each contribute to what needs to be done, and that will require some higher level oversight. There needs to be promotion of access to market. The quality of products needs to increase, and technology. The promotion of these things by specific government ministries is often part of that. Governments will need to intervene. Crises happen, and it's not only a plan. Plans do not always go according to plan. Crises happen, and government intervention may be necessary. Today, we may especially think about crises associated with global warming, but there are also other kind of crises as well regarding economic behavior and whatnot, or financing that may dry up in certain sectors or too much and like so. But a very specific feature of the Chinese case is personal accountability and rewards and consequences to ensure that individual actors in government and private sector actually do these things. And this is eventually what I'll be focusing on. So plans exist. Many people are familiar with 5-year plans. They have some slogans over here. We're now in the 14th 5-year plan. But over here, I show you what the consequence is, not only in GDP growth, but also very specific technologies and economic products that are associated with this as well. So in each of these 5-year plans, specific targets have been achieved in China. And that's important. This is an older from China's 15-year science plan from 2006. And you can see how detailed these plans are in very specific areas, such as having large aircraft, certain drugs and innovation, aerospace and aeronautics, information technology, national defense. And I show this to you from 2006 because as you look at this, it's very clear that today many of these targets have been realized. It's very well known in the press and so on. So there's something there that actually produces results. So it's not that other countries don't have plans, but those in China actually produce results. A quick slide from COVID-19 is a little bit of an insight here. Of course, this is a major issue for all countries. but a process of having technical input coming and then the highest level making decisions. And what I want to focus on is actually implementation of those decisions to ensure that there are strong results. I call this managing for results. I don't think that's a Chinese slogan. I have a course that I teach that is called actually managing for results by the public sector. So it's the implementation of those plans that I focus on. So here's a big overview of the economic governance structure, political parties, state council, and various ministries. Oh, and over here you see various plans and reports that may be associated with this. Again, many countries would have something looking similar to this. I want to start with some high-level targets. So this is a little bit old, not too old, about 10 years or so, specific high-level targets that the Chinese government has set that are being sought. But it's in the specifics that I want to go to. Just by the way, some of those specifics or broad targets are associated with different ministries working together for innovation. There are major innovation programs that have been launched. Again, they have resulted in very strong performance, for example, R&D and scientific articles, and the targeting of certain industries, or such as for the mobile phone handset industry, where certain programs were developed that could help companies to achieve certain technical targets to make their products competitive in the global market. But what I really want to focus on is the clustering here, the development of China in these different provincial clusters. And here you see some of these. It says 10 key sectors, but I made the table a little bit shorter, so you may be able to read that. And it shows the distribution of competitive provinces and cities and what they do. I want to go here a little bit deeper. So here we have three of these regional areas, and there's both similarities and differences across these sectors or these clusterings. And the similarities are important because it allows for competition between the companies as well. This is clearly an advantage of China with the economy of size. But there's also differences that allow for specialization as well, that is needed as well, and they can compete internationally to ensure competition as well. I believe that this is actually an important table to take in, the clustering and the allowing for competition across the different clusters. I'll go in the next slide more specific, but I just want to point out here the State Council and the National Development and Reform Commission setting broad guidelines, but then the local governments actually making these plans that are approved by a higher level that leads to the establishment of Chinese urban agglomerations. But while this is one aspect of that, the other one that I'll be focusing on is the supervision and evaluation of these local governments that they actually perform and deliver. And I believe that is a distinguishing feature from which many countries, including those in South America, could actually take note and maybe learn. So here's a specific case of Wuhan and a city cluster of different industries and products. It shows here the development of various plans, the development of different bodies of government working together in the coordination, the issuing, and the management of those plans. And what happens here is a distribution of labor in this regional area, and where some cities focus maybe on the raw material production base, and others the high technology industry base and advanced manufacturing base, and others focusing on, for example, cars or certain textile manufacturing and other things. Whole range of different products here and industries that can benefit from the technology and also from each other. Information technology may be developed in one sector, could be then transferred to another one. This kind of clustering is well known, and China has developed this en masse. And so you can see here the focus on 6 industrial clusters here that within each themselves can be very competitive, but also may have cross-fertilization purposes as well. So for example, in the area of vehicles, combining that with energy, which is of course in electronic cars, electrical vehicles right now, and different companies that have been developed for that, along with use of technology at universities. And so here, for example, is a brand of a car that you probably never heard of. But over time, and actually short time, Chinese cars have become hugely competitive. And this is just an article from the New York Times a couple of weeks ago at the Munich Auto Show, where the Chinese cars are now stealing the show. And we'll be giving the Europeans and the American car manufacturers clearly a run for the money. Also in Brazil, I might add, Chinese cars are increasingly sold and seen as very competitive and desirable. And that's just 20 years later. So, the future happens. There's planning, there's follow through, there's cluster development, and that is part of the Chinese success story. Looking ahead a couple of years ago, so beyond that, let's focus what's the future. Always thinking about what's the future, what's the next in the industry, what's the next products for 10 years from now, 5 years from now. How can we create competitive advantage and have capacity there that competes with the world? So you see these different areas that have been identified. And I think this map, this slide is actually very interesting, and I'd like you to take a minute to look at some of these company names and to ask yourself how many of these you actually know of. You can see how deep and broad China's artificial intelligence industry is: the manufacturing, medical treatments, transportation, public safety, retail businesses, financial services, education. Those are applications. There's a technical layer of companies that focus on face recognition, speech recognition, image identification, knowledge graphing, machine learning, natural language processing, and other technologies as well that serve all these different applications. And in this, there's a foundational level of data, cloud-based, new chips, new vision centers that allow for the technical layer to continue to progress as well. So you can see exactly how deep and broad this AI is. So it's interesting that other countries are now looking to say that we need to do something in AI, but you can see the lead that China may have in this and the depth and breadth of this. This, of course, does not mean that everything is going to be successful, but with such breadth and depth, clearly some things will be highly successful and competitive in the global market. Now, going a little bit deeper here, I want to talk about targets of mayors. So mayors are at the local level, they need to perform, but in China, they are appointed, not elected, and they must perform certain targets if they want to get a promotion, such as maybe to provincial government. So I'm going to show you 3 slides now that show targets and how they have changed over time. So this is of a performance target for mayors in a township government in 1999. It focuses here on agriculture with specific tasks. So the mushroom planting, I guess that's relevant to that city, or banana planting like so. We must also deal with private and small business development, attract some outside investment, and assure some tax revenues over here and fixed investments. So this is a bundle of targets that a mayor is given, and undoubtedly this will be driving the allocation of specific tasks within the local government. Fast forward here, but only 7 years later, in 2006, you can see how this is broadening and dealing with new concerns of the day. Yes, there is still a concern for economic development, and that continues to be driving. But there's also concern for environmental quality index, energy consumption index, reduction of government debts. These things become in focus as well. There's also issues of modernization, urbanization, but also R&D within the jurisdiction. Also, issues of educational development and public health come into focus, and concern of administration by law, which then becomes a target. So you can see a shift away from just agriculture and economic development to other things of concern with environmental quality and what might be called social economic development in the area of education, health, and administration by law. This is 2006, and here we see some targets for a municipal system in Fujian, one of the provinces. Again, economic development, of course, is very important. But if you look at these weights, it's certainly not the only thing that is important. Innovation continues to be important, and even more so in specific ways. But again, Economic development, also very important, with a weight of 100, but also things of drug safety, food safety, things of hospitals and stuff, also important, and the use of e-government services, digital government in government itself. So you can see, if you compare this to the more simple targets in 1999, you can see how about 18 years later, there's a broadening of tasks that governments are expected to do, and targets that they must meet. Again, it doesn't show the reinforcing mechanisms. I'll get to that. But the emphasis, for example, on environmental improvement is very clear in China. The same emphasis, that drives economy, that's the same mechanisms, the processes that have been perfected and honed over 20, 30 years are now put to service in new tasks such as the environment. A clear water project in Wuhan, and specific things of this nature. Now, regarding target mechanism reinforcing, I recently presented just a couple of months ago in June in Holland, together with a colleague at Fudan University, a young professor, Jingyuan Xu, on the accountability mechanisms for improving the environment. Again, the environment is considered to be a sort of complex task that requires coordination of the national government, provincial government, and implementation at local level. And we looked at 3 different accountability mechanisms, setting hard targets that local governments must meet. And not only setting these as must meet, there's actually inspection and control and consequences for not meeting those targets. And I'll get to that in just a second. But again, for local governments also to meet these targets, they must have some capacity. Obviously, there has to be some learning going on. They have to have the resources as well. So we collected some data, looked at environmental performance in terms of measures of water quality improvement, air quality, and waste management. And you can see that central inspection, in terms of identifying violations, size of penalties, and even punishing people, have positive consequences on increasing the local responses to ensuring expenditures on air treatment, and also personnel for monitoring that and having agencies monitor that, and thereby improving that. So we can see that it's not only the target, it's also the inspection of those targets. This is just a case study in the environment from the national government to provinces. And we see this also mirrored in municipal level as well, where central inspection or provincial inspection may drive it in certain cities as well. So it's not only having the target, it's a management of those targets and the learning and the resourcing that goes with that. So up to this point, just very quickly, what are the main points that I've made, because I've given you a lot of information? Well, the first thing that we see in the Asian model, that economic growth is seen to require both market forces plus steering from the center, and the capacity to steer from the center. And the center then sets the grand strategy, which is a combination, again, of market-led and state steering of big goals in the market. Those big goals need to be translated at a lower level. So the center-led growth requires organization, target setting for implementation and coordination and adaptive learning. And that is by sector and by region. It's these regions that formulated these plans and brought these companies into the pictures. And the target setting is widespread use in China, and associated with sort of pragmatism and strong accountability in the implementation. Government officials must achieve these targets. Of course, you will say, is there gaming? Yes, there is. There's ample evidence of that. But despite the gaming, of course, these targets are being implemented, and the record, I believe, speaks for itself of Chinese export and growth. By the way, it doesn't mean that from time to time the market and other government actions may not lead to problems. There will always be challenges. It's widely reported that China may be experiencing some of those now, but I would not discount that what has worked in the past will continue to work in the future as well as a model. Now, as a final part of this presentation, I know I've given you a lot, but I want to show now how what has been learned in China is being diffused to other countries, and first to its neighbors. So there are some countries that are leaders, others that may be following, and some that are really lagging. But I want to focus on these followers right now. And some of this I wrote in a book. There's a textbook that I use for a class that I teach called Performance and Innovation in the Public Sector, that also deals with managing for results. So here's just a slide from Thailand, which is, of course, a neighbor of China, close enough. And outside on the eastern side of Bangkok. Bangkok itself is on the western side here, but on the eastern side, they want to develop that into a regional cluster, very similar as China has done. Now, how successful the time will be, time will tell, but there's certainly a learning of what goes on in China and the desire to copy and perhaps improve that. I want to focus on a particular case of Indonesia. Indonesia is often overlooked, regrettably so in my view. Indonesia is the world's fourth largest population, 260 million people. It's a late democracy that is also developing and dealing with those issues. Now, this is a picture that I took pre-pandemic, I think 2019 and 2018. Over here, this is a group of 700 local government officials that are attending a week-long training put on by the Indonesian Ministry of Bureaucratic Reform. And here's an official of the ministry, and they are being taught how to develop new programs in their city and how to implement that and be accountable for that. They're not sitting during this entire time just listening to a lecture. There are also breakout sessions where people learn how to apply that. In fact, I've been told in order to be sent to here, the mayor of a city had to personally designate these officials, many who are program directors, and they have to come back with something that they can actually implement in their city. Of course, this does not mean that each of these officials will, in fact, implement and do something new, but with these numbers, the possibility of good things happening surely increases. Let me also add that the Ministry of Bureaucratic Reform in Indonesia does this about 5 or 6 times a year in different regions of Indonesia, and this is just one particular region in Java. So they teach people in local government how to develop new programs and have mayor support of doing that. The ministry also provides some technical assistance as well in developing new programs. The technique that they use are logic models. I don't have time to go into that here. But for example, the ministry may present how to promote tourism. People think of tourism as being relatively simple, but it's not only advertising and marketing. You need, for example, roads there. You want people to stay in an area for 5 years. There has to be some nightlife, some economic activity that attracts people there, so small business development becomes important. And anyway, it's a cluster of activities that make tourism successful. For Indonesia, this is important because Bali has been, of course, obviously very successful, but it has also become a little bit full, and there's a need to develop other areas as well. So here's a city, Banyuwangi, and these are officials of Banyuwangi meeting with ministry officials over here, working through how they can adapt this theory into their practice, which they are now implementing over a 4, 5, 6 year plan with targets and bringing capital to that city and region, and working with the private sector and all those things that they are trying to learn from China. Also, following the importance of accountability, performance accountability, CIECH is the performance management program in Bahasa, the Indonesian language. And when they first started this in 2015, and this is why I'm showing this to you, the ministry gave actually very low scores to cities to the extent that they were able to manage their programs in this particular way of targets and managing and capacity and like so. In a democratic context, this requires a certain courage. Think about your ministry giving low scores to mayors, but this is what they did all the same. And over time, this did make an impact, and these scores have certainly increased since then. Although having a high score was at this time not necessary for getting government grants, I believe that in time, having a higher score is seen as desirable when a city is applying for other funding from national governments. There can also be oversight and inspection. Here's a ministry, and you can see how lower level officials can inspect for results that a province or a city is in fact achieving what they sent to do, and we call it performance accountability, and having consequences for that is important. Within the cities, certainly achieving one's performance target is associated with at least perceived or anecdotally higher rates of promotion, careers, success, and so on. I wrote an article on this, which you can access, called Intergovernmental Strategies Advancing Performance and Management Use. And Mohammed Yusuf Atte was a deputy minister at the Indonesian Ministry of Bureaucratic Reform before he got promoted to be the head of the Financial Development Supervisory Agency, which oversees all inspector generals in Indonesia. Finally, this is a slide of a current project that I'm doing, looking at the use of strategic management tools for planning among program directors in 11 ministries, major ministries in both Indonesia and Brazil. And in Indonesia, the government officials perceive higher level of performance accountability, that the results that they achieve have consequences for them. When senior government officials perceive that their performance has consequences for them, they're more likely to use strategic program management, setting targets and following through on that. By contrast, in Brazil, people don't perceive so much performance accountability, and they do not use these tools very much. So there's a lesson there, obviously. So in short, I've spoken about target setting and management, the importance of local governments and provincial governments being able to create new plans and programs in response to higher level targets set by national governments. Those plans and programs having reasonably clear targets within industries that they try to promote. Those industries and governments having capacity and creating clusters of providers that can feed on each other and having adequate resources to achieve those goals. And I think the thing that is added here is accountability for results. Officials and I guess private companies getting money and being part of this promotion system, they must produce results. And my very final slide is looking at these slides again. What would this mean for your country? The training of local government officials who run programs to develop new programs and move their areas, their cities or regions forward in particular new ways. And again, I remind you of this map, which is China today, but wasn't the case 45 years ago. And you can think of maybe what things to promote or what's issues of the environment or poverty might be addressed at a local level. My final word would be when I show this to civil servants who we train in Brazil, executives who take part in our public administration program. Let's say you look at this map and you think of Brazil today, as in 45 years ago, São Paulo is and was the economic heart of Brazil. But if it had developed like this and had promoted that, Brazil might now have 2 or even 3 São Paulos, and what difference that would make for lifting millions of people out of poverty in Brazil. So that is my presentation for you. I hope you enjoyed this. I apologize for not being present in Costa Rica with you today. Health concerns prevented me from doing that. Again, thank you so much for the organizers of the Second Congress on International Studies in China at the Confucius Institute of the University of Costa Rica. I sincerely thank you. It's my loss that I'm not with you. I'm sure you are having a wonderful meeting and learning so much from each other. Thank you so much. If you want to send me a email, I will surely respond to you. Thank you and good day. Thank you.